Hey guys, so today I want to talk to you about probability, and we're going to try to understand it and all the concepts that underlie it in the next few videos. To understand probability, there's a couple of concepts that we need to understand. Number one is the concept of a process. Then number two, a special type of process called a random process. This is what we're going to focus on in this video, and we're also going to talk about the intuition of probability and outcomes. In the later videos, we're also going to talk about law of large numbers, which is a practical understanding of probability and how it actually manifests itself in real life. We're going to talk about theoretical derivation, which is usually what you have to do on the test. We're going to talk about the concept of a sample space, and something called a probability distribution is going to wrap everything up for us. So let's start with a process. What is a process? A process is something happening, right? Sounds pretty intuitive, but as statisticians, we actually want to know not just what happens, but what happens at the end of this thing happening. And this we call an outcome. So something happens at the end of which is an outcome. So as a simple diagram, as statisticians, we see a process going to an outcome. Let me illustrate with an example. A simple example can be a coin toss. So a coin toss is you doing something. And at the end, there's going to be, what are the two options on a regular coin? We can get heads or we can get tails. Heads and tails are what we call an outcome. And this is what's of big interest to us as statisticians. We'll get back to outcomes in 1 second. Let's first talk about another concept that is linked to this. It's called an experiment. So, the act of observing an outcome, here you see a badly drawn eye. So when you're looking at something happening, at a process, and then you look at the outcome that resulted from that process, we call that an experiment. And just as a scientific experiment, you never do really just one trial. You do a series of trials. So you have many trials of an experiment. What do I mean by that? That means that you're observing the process a number of times. And you're going to have many trials. And each trial is going to be when you're going to record an outcome. So you're going to have your trial 1. You observe your outcome 1. You're going to have your trial 2. You're going to observe your outcome 2. And so on and so on. And what exactly are we recording? And how are we recording it? We've got to be jotting something down. What are we jotting down, really? So the way we record outcomes is as a variable value. So in our example of a coin toss, we can have a variable called coin side. Which coin side you're going to get on a toss? Is it going to be heads or tails? So what are the possible values for the variable which coin side we get on a coin toss? Well, we can get a head or a tail. And these are going to be our outcomes. So this is how it all ties together. Now let's talk about different types of process. There's random and there's non-random process. Let's start with a non-random process. There is no uncertainty in a non-random process. That's why I kind of wrote, it's boring. Yawn. It's not really interesting. You know exactly what's going to happen. What's the fun in that? So as an example, let's say you're tossing a coin, but it has two heads. It doesn't have tails or heads. It just has two heads. What are the possible outcomes of such a toss? Well, let's think about it. You can get heads. So what's the probability of getting heads? Without even knowing what probability is on a too granular of a level, we can say that probability of getting heads, if I can only get heads, is going to be 100%, right? So it's going to be 100%. Not that interesting. As statisticians, this isn't something that we're very much interested in. What we're much more interested in is something called a random process. In a random process, what you have is an uncertainty of outcome. You don't know what will happen, but you know what could happen. Okay? Think about it for a second. You don't know what will happen, but you know what could happen. What could happen? What do we call that? It's pretty intuitive. It's called an outcome. So, we know what could happen, which is an outcome. We don't know what will happen. So, can we know exactly which outcome will happen? No. We can't. But we can do the next best thing. What we can do is we can use probability to know what is likely to happen, which outcome is actually likely to happen. So what we do is we end up assigning probabilities to outcomes. As an example, with a coin toss, you can have heads, you can have tails. So probability of heads, as you probably already know, is 0.5, 50%. If you don't know that or why that is, don't worry about it, we'll get to it. So that means, how do we interpret such a probability? Probability of heads equals 0.5 means that 50% of the time, 50% of coin tosses can be expected to be heads. So, we went from understanding of the different types of processes to understanding and so this is the intuitive explanation of what probability is. And we're going to talk about deriving and calculating probability in the later videos. Thank you.